What? You've been alive. When I went to my parents-in-law's house for the funeral of my mother-in-law, who had suddenly passed away. When I opened the shed to get out the cleaning supplies, there was my 5-year-old niece there. But my husband would have told me that his sister's child had passed away 6 months ago. My niece had been plump and pretty when I had seen her once before, but she was scrawny and skinny with tattered clothes at that time. Her parents, my sister-in-law and her husband, were infertile overseas and should not have arrived in the US yet. So I was puzzled, not knowing why a 5-year-old child was here alone. Was Grandma all right? When I told my worried niece that my mother-in-law's illness had worsened and sadly came to an end, she began to tell me the truth, which surprised me. I am Amanda, 29 years old. I met my husband Jasper at a company owned by my father. He was 5 years older than me and was a hard-working salesman. I had just graduated from university and he was the boss of my dreams. I became close to him at a company drinking party, and after 1.5 years of dating, we got married 5 years ago. When we were newlyweds, my husband used to take my packed lunches to work with him, but recently he has been having lunch and dinner with his business partners and we haven't had much time to eat together. Jasper's father had already passed away and his sister-in-law's family had left the US because her husband was posted abroad, so my mother-in-law was living alone. He was so worried about my mother-in-law that he used his holidays to visit my parents-in-law's house. I didn't know why, but my mother-in-law didn't like me and refused to even see me. 2 years ago, my husband forgot his phone, so I went to my parents-in-law's house to deliver it, and there was a pretty little girl with big eyes at the door. But when I tried to talk to her, Jasper let her in and slammed the door behind her. I told you not to come here. Don't be so angry. I'm just here to deliver the phone you forgot. By the way, who was that girl who just came in? Oh, my sister's kid. It's Ivy. But your sister is supposed to be abroad for her husband's work, right? He came back from the US to renew his visa or something. That's enough. Go home before my mother gets angry. My husband looked quite flustered and took the phone I was holding in my hand. Then he turned his back on me and entered the house and locked the door with a loud clang. In the end, I was turned away, unable to see my sister-in-law as well as my mother-in-law. I was disappointed, but the impression of my niece, who was so lovely, remained strong in my mind. After that, every time my husband and I talked about having a child soon, I said, I want a child like Ivy. But 6 months ago, when I brought up the subject of my niece as usual, Jasper turned her head down, put his hand to his forehead and made a sad face. Actually, Ivy is gone. What? When? A week ago. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. My niece had fallen ill and passed away without treatment. I was so shocked that I couldn't speak for a while. After calming down, I tried to call my sister-in-law, but my husband told me to leave her alone for a while. I only have my sister-in-law's phone number. I'd like to just send her some incense. Is that not possible? Money, huh? Then I don't care how much money you have. I'll send it to her, so get it ready. I gave my husband $1,000 in a bag, including the incense from me and my parents. In fact, I had called my sister-in-law once right after we got married to find out why my mother-in-law hated me. At that time, my sister-in-law told me, "Mother-in-laws everywhere don't like their wives. Don't worry about it," which was a relief. Frankly, it was frustrating not being able to help her at a time like this. I have only met my lovely niece once, 2 years ago, when I delivered my husband's forgotten phone. But the misfortunes didn't stop there. Yesterday, my husband went to my parents-in-law's house because he had some errands. My mom collapsed in her house. The doctor told me her chronic asthma had got worse and she was in quite a dangerous state. I'll be there as soon as I can. Can you tell me which hospital they took her to? No, you don't have to come. My mother doesn't want to see you, so she didn't want me to tell you that she collapsed. Oh, no. My husband said he would stay at the hospital to take care of her, so I told him to call me immediately if anything happened. I was shocked that my mother-in-law had fallen ill, but I was even more depressed that she didn't want to see me even at a time like this, and I spent a sleepless night. The next day, I was so worried that I called my husband and asked him to tell me again where my mother-in-law was hospitalized. She just breathed her last. Oh my God. I want to at least give her a funeral in a familiar home, so I can clean up my parents' house. I'm going to go and see the doctor now, but there's an emergency and it's going to take a while. Right. Okay. I left the window unlocked, so you'll be able to go in there. Don't go into my mother's room. It's her last request. I went to my mother-in-law's house after buying some groceries and finished cleaning up the house with a sense of helplessness after hearing my mother-in-law's last wishes, who had refused me until before she left for the other side. When I looked in the garden, there were weeds everywhere. I opened the badly built shed to see if there was anything in there to cut the weeds, and I was astonished. To my surprise, there was a child cowering there. Who is it? It's finally open. It was pitch black and scary. I looked at the face of the child who had embraced me, and her eyes were bright and she looked a lot like my niece, whom I had met before she died. Are you Ivy? Ah, of course not. Do you know my name? No way, is it? The girl wiped her tears with her hand and nodded broadly, saying, yes. What? Have you been alive? What on earth does that mean? When I was surprised to find my 5-year-old niece, who was supposed to be gone, in the shed, Ivy tilted her head and looked at me strangely. Moreover, she had been plump when I met her 2 years ago, but she was scrawny and thin, wearing tattered clothes. Her fingernails were also in shreds, as if she had tried to open a badly built shed from the inside. When I took out my phone to make a phone call, my niece saw my husband in the waiting picture and started shaking, saying, "I'm scared. This man is my husband. I'll call him in a minute." Absolutely not. When I tried to call my husband, Ivy stopped me with a serious look on her face. Why? I'll tell you later. I'm hungry now and I'm going to collapse. I need something to eat. After feeding something to my niece, who squatted down with an empty stomach, I decided to ask her what was going on. I made her fried rice and egg soup from what I had bought, and she gobbled it down as if she had never eaten anything before. It's like a dream to be able to eat a full meal. I always have just one cold sandwich. It was as if she had been on a restricted diet. That being said, when I arrived at my parents-in-law's house, the fridge was almost empty. I felt sorry for Ivy, who was smiling with rice grains around her mouth. As I was thinking about where to start, my niece, who had been smiling earlier, suddenly looked worried. Was Grandma all right? Well, she's gone to heaven. Were you there when she collapsed, Ivy? Yes. The scary man in your smartphone was there too. You know. To my surprise, my mother-in-law had an asthma attack when my husband was present. And that Jasper had taken the inhaler that my mother-in-law was holding in her hand and watched her lose consciousness just like that. She told me that when my niece was startled and screamed loudly, my husband hit her, and when she realized she was in a dark place. That's why she was in the shed. If that was true, it was a terrible thing. Thinking back, my husband felt somewhat strange when I saw Ivy in this place. Ivy, when did you come back to this house? I've been here all the time. Why? I could only think that Jasper was hiding some serious secret, and I left my niece with my own parents to ensure her safety. Then I stepped into my mother-in-law's room, which Jasper had forbidden me to enter. My mother-in-law's diary, which was found in a drawer, contained Jasper's outrageous backstory. It also contained Ivy's secrets. As I read on, my love for my husband turned to hatred. I wondered if my sister-in-law knew about this. It was a risky decision, but I phoned my sister-in-law, and as she listened to my explanation, she said in astonishment, "Oh my God." She was astonished. You know, I've got some great evidence other than this diary, so can I hunt Jasper down to the bone? Of course. I will cooperate with you. I vowed to myself that I would never forgive my husband for the terrible way he had treated the child with his strong backing. After a while, my husband returned to the funeral director and my parents-in-law's house with my mother-in-law, who was sleeping peacefully. My mother-in-law was so emaciated that I thought she was nothing but skin and bones, and there was not a shadow of her to be seen. Jasper had already set a date for the funeral, so I pretended not to know anything and made preparations to see her off. On the day of the funeral, after my husband had finished his speech as the mourner in the presence of his relatives, I asked him if I could say a final goodbye, and he agreed. So I gave my parents a visual cue and asked them to bring the child from the storeroom. Ivy, you were always closest to my mother-in-law, so you have to say goodbye. My husband's eyes widened at the sudden appearance of the child hidden in the storeroom. He turned pale as if he had seen a ghost, as if he thought the child had already gone. But then he looked around and saw that my sister-in-law was nowhere to be seen, and in a moment of hasty wit, he thought he could get away with it. My sister, who is abroad now, couldn't be there today, but she's her child. Oh, that's weird. I heard that she was dead. I gave the money for the incense. No, that's not it. You're saying my child is dead. Then my sister-in-law, who had been asked to wait in my mother-in-law's room, appeared with a blue streak between her eyebrows. Geez. My sister. Why? I can't forgive you for pretending that my child has gone to the other side in order to cheat on Amanda. His sister lied to my husband that she couldn't attend the funeral, and I let her stay at a hotel I had prepared for her after she arrived in Japan. And because she had brought my real niece with her, Jasper was awestruck and restless and began to drip cold sweat. Actually, she's one of my neighbors. No, she's not. She's the girl with your secret lover. And you lied to her about recognizing the girl, took the child away from her and made my mother-in-law raise it. You made your secret lover pay $500 a month in child support. That's disgusting. I held up my pinky finger to the people who attended to show them that it was the child of my husband's unfaithful partner. That's not true. That's really not true. It's seriously different. He was all red-faced and lifting his eyes in adamant denial. That's weird. That's what my mother-in-law wrote in her diary. Let's have you all read it cover to cover. The relatives took turns reading my mother-in-law's diary, turning the pages as they went. There it was written that my husband had an affair when he was engaged to me and that Ivy was born right after we got married. Jasper didn't love me. He left his affair partner to take over my family's assets and my father's company. Moreover, from the middle of the marriage, Jasper, you put the child support money in your own pockets and didn't give it to your mother, did you? Because of that, they had a hard time finding food to eat. Ivy wore tattered clothes, she was so skinny, and my mother-in-law was a shadow of her former self. Everything written there is bullshit. It's my mother's fantasy. Now let's have her appear in person. What? My mother-in-law had written down Emma's telephone number in her diary, so I contacted her and asked her to come. She was hesitant at first, but as soon as I told her that I was going to return Ivy to her here and now, she made her decision. Emma gently hugged Ivy and shed tears, repeatedly saying, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry," she said sadly. Everyone felt sorry for her, and their eyes were filled with sympathy. Ivy's face was blank, but she must have a happy life with her own mother waiting for her. My husband, who seemed to have no more excuses, sat down on a chair without any effort. This is no time to be sitting there nonchalantly. I know you sent your mother to the other side. Don't say that just from your imagination. The hard evidence is on this phone. Pressing the play button on, the recording showed the mother-in-law trying to persuade my husband to return Ivy to her real mother if he would not give her child support. Jasper got furious and said, "If Mom does anything selfish, you'll lose your life." He was threatening his mother. Moreover, he said to my mother-in-law, who was unable to work with a young child, "If you're that thin, you'll soon be on your way to the other side. I'm looking forward to getting your life insurance money," he even left. My mother-in-law was terrified that her son might one day kill her and Ivy, so she recorded her interactions with him on her phone whenever my husband came over. She had written about this in her diary too, so I searched for my mother-in-law's phone and found it on the altar with the screen facing us. The battery was already dead, but I plugged it into the charger, played it back, and I had irrefutable proof. There was also all the footage from the day my mother-in-law died. My husband watched with a grin as my mother-in-law collapsed, wheezing and in agony. Then they showed him beating Ivy, who was scared and trembling, and carrying her towards the garden. The tragedy was so horrific that everyone wanted to cover their eyes, and everyone said, "It's too terrible," and "It's so cruel." Well, will you turn yourself in? Or do you want the police to come and get you? I don't want to do either. Did you expect me to forgive you? What did you expect me to say? If you let me go, I'll serve you for the rest of my life. So save me. I was so disgusted that I couldn't even bring myself to reply, so I called the police on the spot. Surrounded by relatives from both families, Jasper had nowhere to run. Even my mother is at fault. At first she raised Ivy because she wanted money for child support. You don't understand anything. Your mother made the decision to raise Ivy because she wanted you to be happy. What on earth were you spending it on? Like 3-star restaurants and hotel dinners. I can't eat anything that isn't expensive. Huh? Is that why you told me I didn't have to make lunch? Yeah, because your lunches are too common and they make my delicate palate scream. I was so angry that he was giving my mother-in-law and Ivy a hard time for the sake of his own delicious food that I felt like I couldn't handle it anymore. Moreover, I had prepared nutritious stamina lunches for my husband, who was a salesman, but that kind of language was just too much. My mother-in-law would only feed Ivy even if she didn't eat anything. As proof of this, Ivy, accompanied by Emma, would not leave the coffin in which my mother-in-law lay. My mother-in-law must have cherished this child and brought her up with great care. Even so, it was wrong to separate the real mother and daughter, though. My husband looked at us with anger on his face and began to crawl on the floor, shaking slightly, rubbing his forehead and begging for forgiveness. Stop apologizing just for posturing, it doesn't mean anything. Go and realize how serious the crime of taking your mother's life and trying to make Ivy into a thing of nothingness is. While trying to escape from the police officers who rushed to the scene, my husband tripped on a step and broke both knees. Jasper, unable to move due to the pain, was treated in hospital and then interrogated. My mother-in-law's funeral was then held in a dignified manner, and my sister-in-law and I saw her off. A short time later, my husband was arrested for trying to kill my mother-in-law and Ivy. I divorced my husband through a lawyer. I also claimed $20,000 in alimony for the affair and $1,000 that my husband received from me as incense for my niece. I also made him promise to pay $500 a month to Emma as child support. Jasper, of course, was sacked from my father's company, so he would have a hard life after he atoned for his crime. Mother-in-law. As you wrote in your diary, I returned Ivy to her real mother. Now you can rest in peace. I whispered as I looked up at the clear sky. Well, I'm going to work